Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Good to be together. It's good to sing together and pray together, and let's think together also. Often I do polls here, so I'm very interested in knowing how many of you are returning home this week. Yeah, okay. You've got to find replacements before you go. You know that, yeah? So we will miss you. We will miss you for sure. Yesterday, I began teaching a class with a wonderful group of students here on the Haggadah. As you know, Haggadah means telling, and it refers to the telling of the root story of our people, our slavery in Egypt, and our Exodus. I want to tell you something about the process of writing sermons, and I've shared different elements of this over time. I will share with you that I get some of my best ideas from Toby. That's my wife, for those of you who don't know. Conversations that we have and her sharing what she reads with me. I'll also tell you that I get good information from 3- and 4-year-olds in our preschool. That is just witnessing, and don't be offended by that, Toby. A very different type of source, right? It's just witnessing what happens around me. So then there's information that comes from the news, which I don't like to listen to or read anymore, unfortunately. There's always great sports stories that teach a lot about the human spirit. I like that. I read and I study text. And then I figure out what it all has to say about the Parsha. So I was thinking for a while about Purim and the Purim story. And then yesterday, in preparation for the class, I brought the following Yuval Harari quote. He wrote the following: Homo sapiens is a storytelling animal that thinks in stories rather than in numbers or graphs, and believes that the universe itself works like a story, replete with heroes and villains, conflicts and resolutions, climaxes and happy endings. When we look for the meaning of life, we want a story that will explain what reality is all about and what my particular role is in the cosmic drama. This role makes me a part of something bigger than myself and gives meaning to all my experiences and the choices I make. We need stories, and we define ourselves by them. And when we have a common story, then we have a common language. It ties us together. Harari taught that the world's greatest conflicts arise from the fact that different cultures have different stories. And often they create conflict about origins, about land, about God. The narratives create conflict about these types of things that create our identity and our sense of belonging. This is Shabbat Zachor, a time where we remember anti-Semites and our experiences throughout the generations living with anti-Semitism. We read some stories today. We read the narrative about Amalek, the paradigmatic personality who wanted or attempted to destroy the Jews as they wandered in the wilderness. And soon on Pesach in the Haggadah, we're going to read that, quote, in every generation there arose those who wanted to destroy us, but they don't. Somehow in this text we learn that God intervenes and we are saved. But note, it's not for long. There's going to be another generation. There'll be more attempts, and we will survive. Perhaps we will experience a momentary salvation. But be sure, it won't be the ultimate redemption. It will be momentary. As they say, just wait till the next time. And that's our story. This week I listened to a very moving sermon from an incredible rabbi in Los Angeles, Sharon Brous. She both brilliantly and emotionally quoted a friend of hers, Bradley Burston, who lives in Yafo. Burston wrote, and I paraphrase, "I can't take this pain any longer. The world is much too broken. The costs of war, physically, emotionally, morally, is simply too much. My heart is too broken." And then Brous expressed the same. Her heart, like your heart and my heart, is broken. Brous then went on to say that the stories of the war we find ourselves are breaking us in many different ways. The stories of our families and our brothers and our sisters and our mothers and our daughters, they're breaking us. And if we have a heart, the stories of innocent Palestinians, men, women, and children starving, on the verge of a famine, it breaks our hearts also. She then, looking at herself and looking at the world, relayed a number of other stories. And these were different stories. They were stories of Palestinians and Israelis at the University of Haifa who are working together to create a better future at their university and their city. There's stories of groups who work for coexistence in Jerusalem. There's the story of the great Rabbi Tamar Applebaum coming back from an interfaith conference in the UAE with hope that she will build something similar to what's there in Jerusalem, a temple for all peoples. And Brous declared, "You know what I realized? The only way for me to fix my broken heart is to create new stories. To create new stories for me and for ourselves. That's for our sanity." It's a thought that I have had for decades in relation to a number of different things that we have been confronted with. And one is the story that we tell these days. We can change stories. And perhaps we can change lives. And perhaps we can save hearts. We are not going to redeem the world. We shouldn't think so. But we can work to make the world a better place. Culture has done this with stories for children forever. When you were young, did you have Grimm's fairy tales read to you? If you did, you should know that we don't read those stories to little children anymore. They're too cruel. They cause terror. They break hearts. They create fear. We don't read those stories anymore to little children. So on this Shabbat Zachor, I will not be railing against the anti-Semitism that we fear, and that we are suffering from, undoubtedly, and that we know our kids are experiencing on college campuses and in high schools. It is a plague today. It needs responses on all levels, from us and for the world. Remember, Jonathan Sacks once described that what happens to the Jews is like the canary in the mine. It's going to happen to other people also. To preserve our democracy, to preserve decency in this nation, everyone has to join the fight against anti-Semitism. But what I want to do this morning is to speak about the story of Purim and its relationship to anti-Semitism. I want us to consider a very complex examination of a very complex subject which nobody really understands. Defining anti-Semitism is like defining What is a Jew? It's really hard. At Columbia University, the president has appointed an ad hoc committee of faculty members to study anti-Semitism on the campus. They're having great difficulty defining it. They're not sure if all anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And the committee's made up of Jews and non-Jews. Because we know there isn't one type of Jew. There isn't one language that Jews speak. We know we're significant contributors to the world, and yet we are portrayed as being bloodsuckers. We know that we're rich, but we also know there are a lot of poor Jews. We're called chameleons, and sometimes we're indistinguishable from those around us. And so often, that's not the case at all, but we stand out. Sometimes we're obvious by the way a Jew dresses. Remember the sermon I gave on the high holidays? Picture a Jew and what that meant. Sometimes we're distinguishable by our behaviors. But so often, we dress like everybody else, and we behave like everyone else. We're subject to do really good things. Sometimes we do incredible things. And sometimes things are done by Jews that we're ashamed of. We're damned if we do, and we're damned if we don't. And this conversation can make us all crazy. It's been around for 2,000 years, and if I heard the news correctly, it's still here. But I do know that we're smart people. I do know that, and you know that too. And so then I ask the question, if we're so smart, why can't we get rid of it? Thanks. Historians have held up their hands, saying it's irrational and will never be understood. Psychoanalysts have referred to it as a disease, a virus that could come from many different places, but it cannot be critically defined. So I want to ask the question, can we learn something from it? Can we learn something from it that perhaps we can teach the world? I ask the question because I wonder. I have been inspired by the poetry and the literary work of a great Israeli author whose name is Aleph Bet Yehoshua. He died a little more than a year ago. Yehoshua was an ardent Zionist, and he held the position that every Jew should be living in Israel. Yehoshua thought it was the answer to the Jewish question. His claim was that living in Israel was the only answer to combat anti-Semitism. He's no longer alive, so I can't ask him what he thinks about October 7th in relation to that assumption. It showed us that Israel alone is not the solution. In 2005, he wrote a complex and very important article, which I have read over and again and have given to so many students. The name of the article is An Attempt to Identify the Root Cause of Anti-Semitism. And here's the interesting thing. In the article, he points to the role of Megillat Esther, not as a text that inspired anti-Semitism, but as a story that describes it in a unique way. And it does so by its descriptions of the Jewish people, a description formulated by the classic anti-Semite, Haman. Yehoshua points to the fact that the essentials of Jew hatred were already thoroughly, clearly, and concisely formulated in the book of Esther. Now, what you have to note is that the book of Esther was written hundreds of years before Christianity, even more years before Islam, before modern anti-Semitism for sure, before Nazism, before the Middle Eastern and Israel's battles with enemies. Scholars date the text somewhere around the 4th, 3rd century before the Common Era. They found no evidence at all that the events recounted in the book of Esther in fact happened. It's therefore a story written by Jews, for Jews, It's a central part of the Jewish canon, which is read, as you know, annually, tonight and tomorrow morning. We built a holiday around this text in an attempt to imprint it permanently on Jewish national consciousness. And Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There's a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all people, and they don't keep the king's law. Therefore, it's of no benefit to the king to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be written that they be destroyed." Haman's own words tell us about the search for the truth about anti-Semitism. Now, mind you, these words were written by Jews for Jews. Haman clearly speaks of a specific people, a specific religion, and he differentiates that between those two concepts, as we struggle with now. Are you part of a religion? Are you part of a people? How does that work? He doesn't speak of a territorial national minority, but of one people scattered throughout different nations and states. Had the Jews settled within the borders of one nation, the task of identifying them might have been easier. However, and this is the salient point, Haman's not satisfied with the word scattered. He adds the word dispersed. It points to the difficulty of identifying and marking us. Wherever the Jew lived, his features were different from those of Jews living elsewhere. Dressing differently, their names were different. We often changed our names in different cultures to match the names in that culture. We adopted local customs, our language different from place to place. Even when Jews created their own languages, they mutated their host tongues, like Yiddish and Ladino, and one could not understand the other. As a result, Jews couldn't understand each other on a very primary level. They lacked a common language, the very basis of communication. Haman's first sentence expresses the difficulty of identifying them. And now we have a problem, because in some ways we really want to believe that we are one. In other ways, maybe we're not one. Maybe we're a multitude of peoples with an idea, with a Torah. For your religion, I will tell you, is not like the religion of the Jew from Ethiopia, or for that matter, the Jew who's walking in Me'asharim. There are common features, but the differences are vast. Sigmund Freud, you've heard of him? He didn't believe in God. He didn't affiliate with a particular community. Yet he fully embraced the fact that he was a Jew. He called it, quote, a common mental construct shared by millions of people who don't live in the same territory, don't speak the same language, don't even know one another, who include both secular people and religious people, nationalist people and assimilated people. Yet Freud was drawn to imply something that he himself couldn't understand. He wanted to know, why do I feel that connection to the people? Freud couldn't understand it. Even if he would lie on his couch at night for hours, he couldn't figure out. And then a shocking thing that emerged from the text of Haman's words, and that is, they should be destroyed. In other words, Haman presents this idea of genocide. Haman is a Jewish construct written for Jewish people. It was never spoken of before. At such an early stage of the appearance of Jew hatred, the possibility of genocide arises. And then there's one more puzzling aspect of the book of Esther, and we've noted this before. God is not mentioned in the book. So to summarize Aleph Bet Yoshua, the fact that we remain and celebrate our difference and our uniqueness means we're always going to be disdained. Because the world wants to see everything as black and white. The people of the world cannot stand difference. But we are taught to accept difference because we are different. Yoshua thinks that in order to overcome existential danger, We need to be in Israel, as I mentioned. But I think history will prove him wrong. I think it already did. So Sharon Brous said the following: this is where our real challenge lies. And what she said was, we need to create new stories. We need stories that are more reflective of our values. We need stories that bring our people and the world hope. And I thought about this story of Megillat Esther, and I thought about how this story has kept us in a state of victimhood for thousands of years. Sure, Haman was killed and we survived, but yet we continue to repeat the story over and over and over again of those who want to kill us. And here's the question: in 2,500 years, has that helped us? Is that the story we need to perpetuate? Aren't there other wonderful stories to be told? I thought about this in relation to Poland, where we experienced perhaps the ultimate destruction. In the middle of the Warsaw Ghetto today, or what was the Warsaw Ghetto, there was a museum built to Jewish history. And what was built, or what's in that museum, is primarily focused on not the Shoah, not the camps, but 500 years of Jewish productivity, creativity, accomplishment, and the gifts that they gave to Poland before the 20th century. Initially, when they built the museum, they weren't going to have a section for the Shoah. Their response was, our nation is a testament to the Shoah. The ground you walk on is soaked with blood. We need a museum that will look at the other 500 years of Jewish contribution. What about those 500 years? So back to the Megillah. How does the story end? It ends, and I don't know how many of you know this. The story creates a revenge fantasy. We don't pay a lot of attention to the end of the story, do we? But it's disturbing. It tells the story of the death of Haman. That one we can celebrate. But then the death of his 10 sons. And it goes on and it speaks of the Jews killing hundreds, if not thousands of people throughout the land of Persia. That's right. In the story, the victims become the victimizers. Is that the story we want to perpetuate? Is that what we do with our own victimhood? That we become victimizers? We can change the story because we're no longer victims. We're not. And that's why we have to think about new stories, or at least bring consciousness to them, to use our most important values. Our values narrative must lead us. Do you remember Quentin Tarantino's film *Inglourious Basterds*? Do you remember that film? In it, we celebrated the fantasy of killing Nazis. But that's not what happens in the Megillah's later chapters. Their innocents are killed. So let me suggest that we bring two values to the table. One is Zachor. We need to remember the past. We need to remember the past. We need to sanctify the past. And we need to learn the lessons of the past. We need to use the past to make the world better. It does neither us nor the world any good when the powerful oppress the powerless. We have to learn the lessons of power. We're giving another opportunity right now. Purim doesn't teach that. And the second value is perhaps the most sacred value of all Jewish values. It's the value of teshuvah. This is not part of the observance of one holy day, Yom Kippur. No, we pray for teshuvah every single day of our lives in our Siddur. What does that mean? It's meant to force us to look at ourselves, to evaluate ourselves and our people. Who are we? What do we do? And how do we bring change? I think maybe we should start with our stories. A critical look at the stories of the past, a willingness and courage to create new stories. That's where we are. Shabbat Shalom.